right, good morning. Make sure you hear me. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epic of belief. It was the epic of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. The first lines to Tale of Two Cities, a Charles Dickens novel set in the French Revolution just before the Reign of Terror. I looked to for a perfect picture, metaphor for a tale of two kingdoms. And I received it last year on my way home from work in Vancouver. I was on my way to cross the Granville Bridge when I hit traffic gridlock. And after almost an hour, the traffic had not moved a bit. And finally, it started to slowly move as it was diverted all onto the Burrard Bridge. It was upon crossing that bridge that I saw what had caused the delay. A man was perched outside the railings on the Granville Bridge. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Traffic came to a halt as commuters caught the scene. My heart stopped. On reaching the other side, I couldn't go home, and I called Phil to meet me under the bridge at Granville to pray. A familiar sensation of the presence of the evil one came upon us. We both had felt it before, and we knew that this man was not only in a physical struggle, but also in a spiritual struggle. We wondered what leads someone to that point. A significant other that comes up close 1,000 times to say, I love you, and then one day doesn't. Living through the public disgrace of a financial ruin. Physical, irretrievable loss. Childhood trauma and shame that robs one of a future. Chains of substance use that you can't shake. The loss of someone through death, divorce, or any other fragmentation of our realities. Or as in a suicide note of one person who did jump in California from a bridge, the absence of one person who smiled when they walked on the bridge for the last time. A folk music group called Passenger croons it out in their song called Holes. Now we've got holes in our heart, holes in our life. Where we've got holes, but we carry on. And I thought of that police officer or mental health care worker that walked out tentatively onto the bridge, edging closer and closer to the man, all the while searching for words and a heart connection. What do you say to convince a man to choose life over death? What do you say to someone caught between two kingdoms? At this point, we'll just pray. Dear Lord, I pray for not only your presence, but your Holy Spirit to fill this place. And I also pray for revelation and conviction for your will in our lives. I pray this in your name. Amen. Having explored different directions, rewrote and wrote this sermon, I was praying this week for what is the message? And it came upon my verse of the day, which was Acts 4:20. It was when Peter and John were approached by the Sadducees. The Sadducees were not very happy with what they were preaching, and they said, we cannot but speak the things which we have seen and heard. And today I come as an eyewitness to relate what we have seen and heard. The stories are intense, but I have filtered them. I'm glad there are no children. It is not intended to shock, but like all sermons that I've heard, the saying, it is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. So to that end, 10 years ago, God started to call us out of our comfort zones into the adventure of his purpose. We actually heard his voice through media. We saw a short clip on a Christian show when we were in Toronto by International Justice Mission, and it was a Cambodian underground brothel that housed 3 and 7-year-old sisters. The younger, on her sister's hip, bargaining for a night with a customer, and it disgusted us beyond words. We started to monetarily support the organization Ratanak International, a charity that had been started by a Vancouver forensic scientist who had started by bringing food to the country post-Pol Pot's reign of terror, and who too had been unable to turn his face from the sex trade of young children. You know the saying, be careful what you pray for, you might get it. And for us it was, be careful what you pray for, God might mobilize you. And on a visit to Ottawa, we entered a movie theater and ended up being the only ones in the theater watching this movie called Amazing Grace. It's the story of William Wilberforce, a young British parliamentarian who succeeded in stopping the British slave trade. Again, we were moved. We joined a Toronto chapter of Ratanak that met every other week to learn of their work, pray for an hour and a half, and fundraise. We then started to interview and film the stories of victims, perpetrators, scientists, doctors, parliamentarians, activists, first here in Canada and then in Thailand. We learned that human trafficking is the trade of humans for the purpose of forced labor, sexual slavery in the form of prostitution, forced marriage, forced pregnancy for the baby trade. It's also organ or tissue harvesting or implantation of organs, which may or may not kill the victim. Human trafficking crosses international borders, and it leads all types of crimes, including drug and illegal weapons. For with this trade, a human can be sold over and over. Sex trafficking is the fastest growing criminal industry in the world. For the trafficking of children, this includes the use of children as soldiers, drug mules, child brides, beggars, workers in such places as brickyards and firecracker factories, participants in child pornography, and other activities. We read all these things, heard about them, were overwhelmed by the statistics, but then we started to see the faces and put names to the crime. We still vividly remember the first time we interviewed child sex traffickers that had been incarcerated in Ottawa and were part of a pedophilia rehabilitation program. To hear, among other things, the admittance on camera for the first time of a young, well-dressed, articulate man sitting very close, maybe a foot to be within the frame of a camera, that he had sold his own son on the internet sent shivers up my spine. After interviewing a couple of these men, we wandered the Ottawa streets looking for a bite to eat and went to 3 different restaurants. We couldn't figure out what our problem was. We realized we were shell-shocked. What had started as prayers to God for people to step in and defend the voiceless, we actually became a prayer of God for us to step in and go. We raised funds through speaking engagements, an activity we call Freedom Sale, and many other activities. When my daughter went to university and flew the coop, we sold our home business and everything but 6 suitcases and moved in 2015 to Thailand, an epicenter of human trafficking in Southeast Asia. We lived in Phuket. I know my husband's like, how did that get in there? We lived in Phuket, a southern island of Thailand known for its fishing industry and tourism. And the way that I best articulate the island of Phuket is an ice truck. It's non-refrigerated, it's wheeling through the streets at a breakneck pace, trying to sell the ice before it melts. And I felt that was Phuket. It was a transitory island, and it was a place that was extremely dark. It was a place of desperation with ever-decreasing resources. Phuket was also a world-renowned suicide destination, a world-renowned sex commerce hotspot, a place run by mafia rings, the second highest motorcycle deaths in the world, and more. we were shell-shocked. In our first months in Thailand, I believe God gave us a starter course, I call it Battlefield 101, into the unseen battles of the universe's bridge. We met the most unlikely of traffic victims, and we came face to face with the ultimate of traffickers. In our first month there, we started language classes. The first day, our language teacher, Kru Da, Kru meaning teacher, Kru Da wore a dress emblazoned with pineapples and instructed us on the words for different fruits for us to be better able to navigate the local market. She followed up the class by handing out her cell phone very pridefully to show us her Facebook profile picture. I was astonished. She wore a bright red Chinese dress and had a skewer pierced through her cheeks. Her eyes were rolled back. We had to know what this all meant. I talked to her afterwards. She explained how 6 years previous she had been across from her temple when her body of its own accord jumped up and crossed the street, and she became possessed by a tiger god, growling and slashing into the air and pacing as tigers do. Slowly, her story unfolded as we ate every class at our regular vegetarian restaurant, Kun Na's Place. We pieced together her descent into demon possession. As the next year in her life history, she became possessed by a second and then a third demon. She invited the class to attend the upcoming Phuket Vegetarian Festival, the highest celebration of the Chinese Thai population on the island. She explained that 200 years previous, a visiting opera company from China had come to the island and fallen deathly ill. They were cured by converting to a vegetarian diet. What was killing them was actually, she said, the sin of shedding animal blood. What ensued is an annual welcoming of 9 emperor gods back to the island. On their return each year, they seek masangs, meaning entranced horses, or bodies which they inhabit, and through them bless other devotees. The temple devotees erect a pole with a serpent design on it at each temple to attract the gods to descend and fill the temple. The people of the community bring their gods from their personal sanctuaries at home to the temple to be infused with the spirit. Now, Da has a few friends, and for the festival, each possessed person had up to 15 attendants. Kun Na, the restaurant owner, decided one day that she would give me a new name, Jan, which means moon. And this goddess figures highly in the Chinese Thai Taoist animist religion. And it was Kun Na's attempt to make me an attendant. We also noticed that in a restaurant there was a loop of temple chants played over and over again, which we hadn't noticed at first. The second time Kun Na called me by the name, I had recognized her intentions and told her that my name was Isabelle, but my mother had given it to me, and it actually meant consecrated to God, my God. She understood. We still remained good friends, but we knew that we stood as ambassadors of 2 very different kingdoms. The war between darkness and light, between evil and good, that rages on earth today started a long time ago in a place far removed from earth. It started in heaven with warring angels. Over an attempted coup, Satan, seeking to be God, accused God of what Satan himself suffered from, selfishness and an abuse of power. Convincing a third of the angels, Satan, Lucifer, light bearer as he was then called, was cast out of heaven with the angels that believed as he did. Coming down to earth, Satan next convinced Earth's 2 inhabitants that indeed God was not out for their best interest, that God's caution that death would result from disobeying him was simply a way for God to keep them from a higher state of being, from knowing what gods know, from actually being immortal gods. Adam and Eve conceded, and Satan has successfully marked his territory from that point on. Phil and I were quickly aware that we could not think as humans, created a little lower than angels, that we could even think to come against angels, good or evil, on our own. In fact, it was foolish. We knew this, and when Da said that she was entering a 10-day preparation period before the arrival of her gods, we knew we were set to see the battle up front and close, and that we had better start our preparations. Every year, devotees gather at the temples and raise the Teng pole. Each person pays money, and they have gold leaves, and they leaf the pole, and then it is raised. This is to guide in the demons which gather on the first night of the festival, supposedly, at midnight at the sea's edge, where they come to invoke and welcome thousands of demons to the island. For 6 years, Da has been doing this, shaking her head back and forth for years as the drums beat and the incense chokes. We thought to ourselves, how do you prepare to come up against thousands of demon-possessed people, one of which is your friend? All I could think of is back to missionary stories that I had heard when I was a child about faith healers and exorcisms in far-off places. The Christians that we knew on the island were praying, but they had decided to pray the blood of Jesus over their doorposts and were to spend the 9 days mainly inside their home, and wondered why we would even think to have this person over at our house or even go to the place. We felt that God had put this person immediately in our path and that she was our person. We also knew that Jesus had told his disciples when they were unable to cast out demons that this kind of thing did not happen without prayer and fasting. We had heard from Da that year her God had asked her to pour boiling oil over herself, and we prayed that this would not happen. We started to prepare in the only way we knew how, fasting and continual prayer. We emailed our prayer group in Canada and Toronto, and they prayed for 10 days as well for the festival, for our protection physically and spiritually. We were to come against the other kingdom, and we were thinking there needs to be the breaking of generations of bondage. Da's father had also been a Mason. We asked for the infilling of his spirit of truth and power. I remember putting on my white jeans and white blouse for the first day of the event. Wearing white is a sign of showing respect. And I had written power verses on a paper, which I kept in my pocket. For 9 days, we followed Da around from midnight events to pre-dawn events. We started off with a luncheon with the mayor of the town, and Da's there with the rest of our Thai language class. We saw prayer as the only way to enter the battlefield, as a rebellion against the status quo, a declaration that evil is not a variation on good, but its polar opposite. Before I arrived in Thailand, I was fearfully warding off world values and beliefs from creeping into my life. The belief that religions are fundamentally the same, but superficially different. Why upset people who are happy already? That the maladies of Jesus' time were just manifestations of mental illness, like schizophrenia. The idea that I'm not the one to preach the gospel, give me humanitarian work anytime. When I saw the power of this festival, I saw not a variation on God, but a diabolical polar opposite power. I saw two kingdoms clashing. In the 9-day festival, we saw our friend transform from our beloved Da to a seething, drooling, fearful tiger that had to be held back. And then on the next day, to a jovial, Chinese-speaking visiting girl. Her eyes looked through you, and I was wondering who I was looking at. Her face was pierced through with a skewer. Others had worse items pierced through their faces: bicycle tires, chains, guns, you name it. It was a bloodbath. And standing on the parade route, it felt like it was an invasion of the zombies. For hours and hours, we watched them come through, dripping blood. At the festival, she and an estimated 1,000 others possessed would walk 20 kilometers and stop at tables laden with food offerings, attended by store employees and residents, giving the gifts to the gods that were visiting and hoping for a reciprocal blessing. This picture is actually the carrying of the 9 emperor gods, which is accompanied by fireworks. The entire parade would bow down. Of course, we moved to the back. We're not going to bow. I asked her what it felt like to be possessed by her gods. Surprisingly, she said it was like being asleep, like you were at the back of your head watching someone else control your body. She said that she and other Masongs were the saviors of their community, taking on the sins of eating meat by the shedding of their own blood. She said her life was actually being extended because she housed the gods in her body. Should she ever stop, she would die. Through it all, I saw Da as a slave, a person whose body had been trafficked without her choice, someone whose body was being used, destroyed in steps until she too would have been killed off, as much of the long-time Masongs were. Da had been trafficked by the penultimate of traffickers, Satan. And what is happening to Da is a raw example of Satan's modus operandi. Similar to a trafficker, he relies on lies, promises of a better life, a numbing of the victim's senses with some mind-altering substance, sometimes the addiction to drugs or other activities, coercion, violence, death. And when the trafficker has got enough of you and can get no more, death. And in direct contrast to this, we see the ways of Jesus as he meets up with another slave. When I spoke with Da, I wanted to couch what I knew about my God in terms that she understood. And I told her that my God enters me too. She was fascinated. Your God enters you? Yes. She goes, well, what does he look like? Like a tiger? Do you speak a different language that you don't know? Like, what do you look like? And I said, I couldn't think. I said, I look like, it has to be love. It has to be love. But if I do not want my God any longer, I can ask him to leave. I do not have to hold him in me. And my God died for me, shed his own blood, died for me and others. I don't have to do it. She was intrigued. We find another story of another slave in John 5. John is the only one that recounts this story, and it comes after the story of the woman at the well who was offered living water by Jesus. We read in John 5, 1-4. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is at Jerusalem by the sheep market a pool which is called in the Hebrew tongue Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a multitude of impotent folk, of blind, halt, withered, waiting for the moving of the waters. For an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. Whosoever then first after the troubling of the water stepped in was made whole of whatsoever disease he had. A pool near the sheep gate into Jerusalem, which is covered by 5 covered colonnades. In 1888, archaeologists discovered the remains of a pool fitting this description. Over time, there's been first one pool and then a secondary pool built. The name of this is said to be derived from Hebrew and means hour of mercy or grace. And the word Hesda can also mean shame or disgrace. The use of the place in John 5 as a place for large numbers of infirm people corresponds well with the site's first century use as an Asclepion. Asclepions were healing temples for physical and spiritual healing located in ancient Greece and then into Roman times, dedicated to Asclepius, the first doctor demigod in Greek mythology. By entering that place, Jesus was actually coming up against the kingdom of darkness, the then worshipped god of healing and indeed of resurrection, Asclepius. Asclepius' name means to cut open. A myth says that he was delivered C-section. He was said to be so deft with surgery that he was able to bring people back from death. Myth says he was killed by Zeus at request of Hades, who felt people were being stolen from him. You'll see that the modus operandi of this god has great parallels to my friend Da's experience as a mason. In ancient Greek healing in these Asclepions, or healing places, there was first the catharsis or purification stage, where you would perform a sacrifice and pray. Actually, at the archaeologist's site, there are pottery, pottery limbs at the bottom of the archaeological sites. So people had made statues or pieces of the limbs or parts of their body that needed to be healed, and that had been thrown and found their way to the bottom. Part of the catharsis was a clean diet over many days as well. Then there was the temple sleep, which is an incubation period, likely brought on via hallucinogens. And then Asclepius, supposedly, and his daughters would reveal the outcome and prescription. The person upon waking would tell the priest the dream, who would interpret and give the prescription, often a visit to a bath or a gymnasium. Temple was overridden by snakes. I heard about this in Malaysia, and I asked my taxi driver, should I go? And he says, well, there are poisonous snakes there, so running free. So I said, no, thanks. And this is also common in India. We also see this in modern day symbols of medicine and pharmacy, the snake coiled around the rod. And again, we saw this at Da's temple. Many Bible scholars and historians attribute the disturbing of the waters by an angel as the Jewish version of a conquered people taking on part of the conquered nations' religions, as actually the priests would release snakes, and this was common, from their sticks onto the surface of the pool waters. Others propose perhaps a periodic underwater geyser in keeping with the therapy of the healing temple. But here Jesus meets our second trafficked victim. And a certain man was there which had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lie and knew that he had been in a long time in that case, he said unto him, Wilt thou be made whole? The impotent man answered him, Sir, I have no man when the water is troubled to put me into the pool. But while I am coming, another steppeth down before me. Jesus saith unto him, Rise, take up thy bed and walk. And immediately the man was made whole, and took up his bed and walked. The man at the pool, described as a paralytic of 38 years, had put his life on hold to seek freedom from his physical malady. The man at the pool was seeking not only physical but spiritual healing, for disability and illness was seen as a judgment of God for sin. To be disabled in Hebrew times, or a sick person, was, 1, to be disowned. It brought shame to the family. I saw this directly in Thailand. I taught at an international Thai school, and I had to educate fellow Thai teachers about not ridiculing the autistic children. Parents avoided hearing anything about their children's problems, and the homes for disabled were run mainly by charitable foreigners. In India, the sick, maimed, and disabled are actually said to be working out their karma and need to do that without interference for better placement in their next lives. So you see a lot of these beliefs coming through. To be sick in Hebrew times was to be banished from God, which was the worst. A priest, according to Moses' admonishment to Aaron and the priests in Leviticus, there was a plethora of warnings about touching the leprous or infirmed. Healing from God seemed an impossibility when God's representatives on earth wouldn't even come near you. Third, he was 38 years old. An old man by that day's standards, 35 to 40 being an average lifespan. Perhaps he had simply outlived his friends. Maybe his friends got tired of helping him out. Maybe they felt they were enabling his illness. Maybe his illness was brought on by substance abuse, maybe hallucinogens, dependence. Maybe his friends were busy with their own quests for healing. In The Desire of Ages, Ellen White speaks of how people were regularly trampled in the surge toward the water. Jesus' trip to this pagan temple speaks to a mind of the ultimate healer. No sickness, no sin is too low a place for Jesus to enter. Indeed, as a Jewish rabbi, Jesus would become unclean by touching or associating with the ill or disabled, let alone an entire temple filled with hundreds of these people. Then to continue on to visit the Jerusalem temple after such a visit was even beyond reprehensible. Even beyond this, it was a time of a feast. And to top it off, Jesus healed the man on the Sabbath. Jesus had been actually on his way to the Jerusalem temple when he stopped at this temple, or this pool of Bethesda. There are actually 3 big occasions or festivals in which a rabbi would visit the temple in Jerusalem: Passover, Pentecost, and Yom Kippur, or Day of Atonement. Historians and Bible commentators largely feel that Jesus was going there for Pentecost. Nevertheless, Jesus was not afraid of becoming impure. Oftentimes, there is a separation of the holy from the secular church life, and this church life becomes separated from real life. Ministry is messy work. When we go to help a person or address a big social ill, we may wonder if we are actually enabling a weakness, causing more harm than good, or simply, if we do take action, hardly making a dent in the mountain of trouble. Helping will take time out of our days, bring inefficiency to the process, try the limits of our patience. But despite this, we are called to do it. Jesus stood and asked him, "Do you want to be healed?" Jesus' way is a free choice. What do you want? His power is released at the request of mortal man. What a concept. What a responsibility. What an amazing privilege. For the paralytic, there are possible answers. The saddest answer would be, I am in need of nothing. I don't need to be healed. The rich and increased in goods and in need of nothing people's answer. But our righteousness as filthy rags, to paraphrase the Bible, is we are all spiritually full of holes. Then, as sad, no thanks, I have other options which I need to explore. I'm sure they're a better fit for my problem, and in this way, true healing is rejected. But that day, the man at the pool responded with the best answer. I have no one to put me in, or I have come to the end of me. First step in healing, admitting you have a problem, admitting you are the problem. Hi, I'm Joe. I'm an alcoholic. You hear at AA meetings. Jesus offers a way for the man. Take up your bed and walk. The man took up his bed and walked. A very simple, short description for an amazing climax to a lifetime of waiting and yearning. Jesus left the temple triumphant. Where that world's God of healing had failed, Jesus had succeeded. Jesus meets up with the man at the temple, at the Jerusalem temple later, and cautions him, Behold, thou art made whole. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come unto thee. At the turn of the century, when the first cataract surgeries were performed, the first patients who had lived for numerous years as blind were given their sight by the removal of their cataracts. After several weeks, many of them chose to cover their eyes and return to their state of blindness. It's hard to change, to be healed, even if the benefits are tremendously good. It requires a massive amount of adjustments. Why, the man at the pool had to change his daily routines. He had to find employment. Perhaps begging had been his livelihood. He had to reconnect and heal fractured relationships. He had to make new friends. He actually had to develop an identity that did not include the label sick, sinner, untouchable, nobody. Women who have left abusive partners often return many times before finally leaving or being killed. This is called battered women syndrome. Maybe there are here some who have escaped substance abuse and must forever be diligent to avoid a return to their former addictions. Cycles of abuse and abusing continue through generations unchecked unless direct intervention and emotional work is done. We all struggle with strategies that worked in former traumatic situations as a way of coping, but that cause untold problems when they continue to be used. Today, many sit at pools of healing looking for a way where there is none. Overcome by hopelessness and the shame of their trauma, both felt and inflicted, they search for relief. In Toronto, I interviewed one such man. Sexually and abused and trafficked by his own father from infancy, one cannot imagine the extent of evil he suffered. He speaks of a shame that reverberates through him to this day. The shameful acts perpetuated on him became his identity.
Severe abuse, and often when you see child pornography or you see a child in the sex trade, you are seeing a child under severe abuse who has had multiple experiences of trauma inflicted by multiple people on multiple times. So to cope with that, most young children will create some form of dissociation, some form of dissociative disorders, where the way that they behave in one circumstance will be different than another circumstance. So that when the child wakes up in the morning and eats breakfast, they're not puking because their body is overwhelmed by what happened to them. They split off the night before and they may not even remember. Some of the times that when I had severe abuse inflicted on me and severe shame and molestations inflicted on me, the next day I would be just overwhelmed with shame. Like just so, it would be so, I can't give words for how intense it would be, but I would dissociate off the memory of what had happened. And so I'm sitting in classroom and I'm feeling so ashamed and I'm feeling so vulnerable that I do not know if I'm naked or not, and I'm not willing to look down to see my legs or to see my body, because the feeling of being naked and the feeling of shame and everything is so overwhelmingly intense, I really can't even cope with it. And I'm even was wanting to die. I was hoping that the earth would open up or the building would crash down or something, because the feelings were so intense. And
Shame. Its power can mark a lifetime, manifest in so many ways. For Dr. Irving, he spent most of his childhood illiterate. He taught himself to read, and he worked himself up to become the PhD psychotherapist he is today. As an artist, his monuments to child abuse survivors are a collection of 276 handprints in bronze taken from the ones who seek his help to heal. Housed inside the 11 by 30 foot wide sculptures are hundreds of paper hands with survivor stories. The transformation from healed to healer is one that Jesus empowers his followers to make. He asks us to partner with him to become his hands and feet. We need not look far to hear the cry for freedom. The place we call home, our island, seemingly far from the stories of the trafficked souls we have heard today, is also full of thousands of voices looking for healing, is also a place of strongholds. I ask the question, what is the fastest growing religion in North America? It's Wicca. Millennials, teens, and young people are especially attracted to this religion, which worships nature, reveres people as gods and goddesses, practices magic with a K in order to differentiate it from the illusionary magic of birthday parties, and it has enjoyed a recent rise in Instagram and inroads into wellness industries such as the beauty industry. Victoria is the witch capital of Canada. Professor of Anthropology Heather Botting at UVic, also known as Lady Aurora, is the first recognized Wiccan chaplain in a public university. She started the first Wiccan convent in Peterborough, Ontario, as a daughter of a Jehovah's Witness family, and has written a book against that religion. She hived this Wiccan convent in Sylvan Lake, Alberta, spreading from there. She is the founding elder of Aquarian Tabernacle on the island. The members start prayers at 2 a.m. and pray for 4 hours each day. They conduct a thriving prison ministry, hospital chaplaincy, and they conduct the most pagan weddings in the province. Victoria, Shawnigan's Lake, Cobble Hill, Salt Spring Island boast notable populations of Wiccan adherents. The battle of souls rages on many fronts. In North America, the death rate has shown a dramatic increase in the previous 5 years. Why the shift? Gun deaths? No. Crime? No. It has been attributed to two things: opiate deaths and suicides. Our own First Nations youth on Vancouver Island fight with feelings of being forgotten, histories of trauma, substance abuse, and disconnection. Too regularly we hear of suicide community emergencies. The First Nation problems I have seen working at the Christian school I am at and speaking with local leaders rival anything I have seen in Southeast Asia. First Nation members' experiences in human trafficking, health, and education challenges top any other population in Canada. You see, Canada, Satan is here going around like a roaring lion, seeking those whom he may devour. The helplessness and hopelessness that pervades the world is increasing. Teen depression is at an unprecedented high. Much of this is attributed in part to social media's pervasiveness in their lives and to increased materialism. But primary to the increase in hopelessness is the loss of God. People simply cannot find enough to fill the holes that remain. We have seen this evident in the media. Last year, Kate Spade, fashion icon, committed suicide. Anthony Bourdain, world-renowned travel food connoisseur, also committed suicide. In 2014, Robin Williams, comedian, one of the funniest men on the planet, shocked the world when he, too, committed suicide. The thief comes not but for to steal and to kill and to destroy. But Jesus says, I am come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. Every act of healing, every act of exorcism, every resurrection was Jesus and the kingdom of light pushing back the kingdom of darkness, taking back territory. Thieves come at night unawares, and the worst way to enter a battle is asleep. As lights go out, and darkness takes over, we can sit aside and say, it's the sign of the times. Even so, Lord Jesus, come. Or we can ask God to teach us to pray. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Jesus responds, speaking of his miracles and kingdom-building acts of war on earth. He that believeth in me and the works that I do, shall he do also, and greater works than these shall he do. To follow Jesus is to go to war. Here is a quote from an amazing book. It was the text for the Perspectives course we took, a preparatory course for missionaries going out. If one believes that a good and wise divine purpose ultimately lies behind the sickness, disease, and atrocity that makes the world a nightmarish place, then one subtly shifts the problem of evil from something one has to war against to something one has to think through. When we trade problems in this fashion, we have surrendered a spiritual conflict we are commissioned to fight and ultimately win for an intellectual puzzle we can never resolve. It is an exceedingly poor trade. If instead we follow the example of our Savior, our basic stance toward evil in the world would be characterized by revolt, holy rage, social activism, aggressive warfare, not pious resignation. Do not pray for easy lives. Pray to be stronger men and women. Do not pray for tasks equal to your powers. Pray for powers equal to your tasks. I close with the faces of 6 trafficking victims. They represent the smallest of victims. These are the ones that compel me forward. Sold by their mother, intimate of injuries, the loss of and betrayal by their own mothers. Colonel Pepe was a retired U.S. Marine Corps captain living in Cambodia, and these 6 little girls, then aged 9 to 13, were his property. In 2008, following a probe by U.S. Immigration and Customs and Homeland Security investigations, Pepe was arrested for what they described only as the most monstrous acts on children they had ever seen. Despite debilitating PTSD, the 6 girls courageously agreed to testify against their evil captor. They were flown to LA for the trial. On the day of the trial, the girls begged their guardians and Secret Service men to stop at the beach. After much imploring, the guards agreed. The girls spent a brief 10 minutes beachcombing and returned to the car in lighter spirits. At the trial, the girls were raked over the coals. Reliving the torture and abuse in detail, each girl clung to a stone. You see, the girls had learned in church that David conquered his giant with God's power and a single stone. The torturous trial came finally to an end, and the rule of that kingdom of darkness came to an end. Colonel Pepe was given 210 years in prison for his crimes. Darkness had come, but the light had not been overcome. The girls returned to Cambodia and started work in a bakery designed for girls re-entering the world after being trafficked. It is called Bloom's Cafe, an initiative by Ratanak International. One day, a well-dressed woman with a French accent entered the establishment and having heard of the exemplary cupcake art created there, requested that the girls make the birthday cake for the Princess of Cambodia. The girls had come from the worst rejection, abuse, disrepute, and shame possible in that culture to being accepted and valued by royalty. Their story is a story of God's kingdom's power to turn ashes to beauty, mourning to joy, and the spirit of heaviness to the garment of praise. In Cambodia, there is a saying, men are like gold, and women are like cloth. If men fall short, they can be reclaimed like the repolishing of a gold item. If women are raped or prostituted or brought into disrepute, they remain soiled goods. But for in this case, these girls have actually done the unthinkable. They have grown up and married and have families of their own, the power of redemption. 2 kingdoms call. The kingdom of darkness, Satan at its helm says, the way you are is the way you'll always be. The kingdom of light, Jesus says, I am the way. The kingdom of darkness, the father of lies, says, what I say is who you are. And Jesus says, I am the truth. The prince of darkness says, choose death. Jesus says, I am the life. Satan says, jump. Jesus says, I am the bridge.